To take the project further, we're going to try 3 things here with the quote layer alone. First thing I'll do is make sure that I have that group, that folder selected. And maybe what I'll do first is actually make sure it's selected, layer, new adjustment layer, hue and saturation. We'll talk about the adjustment in a moment. We don't need to worry about changing the name here. The most important thing is to use previous layer to create clipping mask. Make sure that box is checked. Say OK. I'm going to move this palette out of the way for a moment. You're going to see, just like the clipping group, it's going to only affect what's in the group folder right now. This Hue Saturation dialog box is open. There are several things at play here. The first thing I'm thinking about is, since I sampled the orange from the pencils, it feels a little too much alike. So the first slider bar allows us to actually shift the color spectrum of what's happening in that group folder. And I can go with something that's highly contrasting by dragging that first slider. Maybe that. The saturation, the intensity of the color can become, it's hard to make that more vibrant than it is already, but we can dull it a bit if we want it. And then lightness can also be altered. So maybe I'll do that. I can close this box, but if I ever change my mind, it's great because I just come right back over here, this little icon, boom. Maybe I bring this back to 0. And I can change this back to 0. And maybe I want it that way. These are always variables that can come back and be changed, and that's what's great about adjustment layers. So that's one thing. Here's the reason I didn't go back and change. I'm holding the Command key, and I'm going to grab every other text layer here. Come over to the text tool and switch them from white to black. Right? So since that text is still editable, I can do that. And then if I truly am happy with that, I'm going to close that group folder. I'm going to turn off everything except for all the layers that the quote is on. And I'm going to come to the top of the layers palette here on the right hand side, in this little hamburger as they call it. I'm going to open up this pop-up list. And there's an option here that says Merge Visible. Shift Command E. If I merge visible, I lose all these text layers as something that's editable if I want to change my mind and do something later. So instead, I'm holding down the Option key and then choosing this Merge Visible. And if you take a look here, it created a layer that's merged, but I still have what I started off with. This is what I started off with. I can turn these on and off independently, and you can see that it changes on the fly. If I turn that off, this layer, there's nothing I can change. The Hue Saturation affects it because it's the layer immediately underneath. This one is no longer affected. That's okay, because I'm going to continue to work with this. And then otherwise my project looks the same when I turn the other things on. But by merging those layers and no longer having it be editable text, I've got everything at my disposal here under the filters menu. So I might actually add some noise to this document. That is way too much. Maybe I want to keep that noise. Monochromatic. It just starts to kind of dust it up, make it grungy a bit. Maybe that's a possibility. Filter, distort, wave. We're not going to get much of a preview here, but if I click OK, you can see what starts to happen. Maybe there's some other filters you want to explore and try and see what it does to the text. That's distorted so much that I'm not too crazy about it. I'll come to wave here, except instead of choosing it from the menu bar down below, I'm going to hold down the Option key and choose it right here from the top. It remembers the last thing that was done. And I'm just going to back off on the intensity of some of these waves that it had defined. And if I say OK now, still not very good. So there's some experimentation to be done there. But the idea that rasterizing those text layers and making a filter is an option. There we go. Feel a little better with that. This is an option. Not using the hue saturation is an option, or the ability of changing the text color, as you saw. All become ways that we can play with the, we'll call it the background layer of text that was generated.